What is a UG or universal grammar? According to Chomsky, UG is linguistic ability manifests itself without being taught. There are properties that all natural human language share. Language learning involves innateness, and observation and experimentation determine innate abilities and properties shared by all languages. What does UG consist of? UG approach claims that there is a universal set of principles and parameters that control the shape of human language. Those are principles and parameters. Principles is unvarying and applicable to all natural languages. And parameters possess a limited number of open values. A principle of UG is a statement that is true for all human languages. For example, the principle of structure dependency. And in parameter, a parameter must be set according to the requirements of the language being acquired. For example, the null subject parameter. Universal grammar arguments from first language acquisition. Main characteristics of first language acquisitions are children go through development stages. And second, these stages are very similar across children, although the rate differs. Third, their stages are similar across languages. And role-governed and systematic. And next, children are resistant to correction. Next, children's processing capacity limits the number of rules they can apply at any time, and they will revert to earlier hypothesis when two or more rules compete. Next, these characteristics of first language acquisition are similar to second language acquisition characteristics. Hence, universalists could not conclude the evidence that there is a language module in the brain out of it. And however, it is clear that the child language acquisition has nothing with intelligence. Is universal grammar accessible to second language acquisition? All parameterized options offered by UG need to be accessible to the second language learner, unless inductive learning enables learners to make necessary changes in their interlanguages. And access to UG is possible as second language acquisition. Access to UG is possible in second language acquisition. As mentioned in Chapter 4, one can distinguish between three proposals, namely full access to UG, partial access to UG, and no access to UG. Full access to UG necessarily implies that learners have all access to all principles and parameterized options at every point of acquisition. To draw on the knowledge provided by UG unless a specific reason induced them to first explore the possibilities offered by the first language grammar, or letter B, to rely initially on previously acquired knowledge and to resort to UG knowledge only if the former fails to provide the desired results. Partial access to UG needs to be specified in theoretically satisfactory way with respect to what kind of knowledge is accessible and what is not, in order to be able to make principled predictions rather than contenting ourselves with the ad hoc claims. No access to UG. No access obviously means that the second language learners do not have direct access to the wealth of implicit knowledge provided by UG. Different conclusions can be drawn concerning the knowledge sources, such as letter A. One possibility is to maintain that second language learners have to rely entirely on non-linguistic, that is, non-domain specific cognitive operations. And letter B. Another option is to argue that principles instantiated in the first language grammar can be used in second language acquisition. All the parameter values cannot be changed since the alternative parametric options are not available anymore. No access means that UG principles are only indirectly available via the first language grammar. Table 5.1 Scenarios involving partial access to UG knowledge in second language acquisition. Partial access can refer to the parameterized or non-parameterized distinction, as well as to the alternative between previously activated or not activated principles. This allows for a number of logical possibilities, though not all are equal plausibility. Table 5.1 presents a schematic overview of the more likely ones. One imaginable scenario implies that only principles not activated in the first language grammar can be accessed in second language acquisition. The idea behind this assumption is that UG principles turn into target grammar principles, becoming part of the native grammar as the first language is acquired. This amounts to saying that UG gradually self-destructs in the course of first language development. Parameterized principles not activated in first language would thus be accessible as in first language and could be set to the appropriate target value. As for the UG principles activated in first language, on the other hand, they are not directly accessible for second language learners, but they are assumed to be available via the first language grammar. Parameter values which are not identical in first language and second language, however, cannot be reset since the kind of knowledge enabling the learner to do this has been lost with the pristine state of UG. At any rate, this would not count as an instance of access to UG, given that it involves access to UG-related knowledge via the first language grammar. Letter B, the second option, means that only principles activated in the course of first language development can be accessed in second language acquisition. The rationale behind this idea is that knowledge not activated during the appropriate period of language acquisition degenerates, possibly as a result of neutral maturation. Only UG knowledge activated in first language remains available. In the case of parameterized principles, this may lead to problems when the second language target setting differs from the one in the first language. Setting parameters to values not implemented in the first language grammar amounts to saying that UG knowledge not activated in the course of first language development continues to be available in second language acquisition. Contrary to the basic line of argument of this second option, according to which UG knowledge needs to be activated early on in order to remain accessible. Only if it can be argued that all possible values are activated in the process of setting a parameter to a specific value will the options not chosen by the first language grammar remain available to second language learners. Although it is difficult to see what kind of psycholinguistic mechanisms might allow for the latter possibility, it cannot be excluded out of hand. In this approach, B thus remains ambiguous with respect to the resetting. The third option is that only non-parameterized principles continue to be accessible in second language acquisition. This hypothesis is based on the assumption that parameterized principles, and only these, are subject to maturational changes. From this, it follows that open parameters, that is, parameterized grammatical options not instantiated in the first language grammar, cannot be fixed anymore in first language settings of parameter. Values cannot be altered in second language acquisition. Partial access to UG considered the most plausible of the three options of proposals. This thematic review of some possible scenarios confirms our suspicion that the broader questions of whether or not second language learner can access UG knowledge can only be answered if a number of more specific issues are settled. The two issues highlighted here are: 1. The structuring issue, whether parameters can be reset to different values once they have been fixed in the first language grammar. The idea of indirect access via the first language grammar is indeed compatible with restricting issue. And second, the inertia issue, whether UG knowledge not activated during first language development can be accessed in the course of second language acquisition. Direct access. Second language is identical to first language acquisition in respect of the UG operation. Full access hypothesis, UG in its entirely constrains second language acquisition. UG is accessible in second language acquisition for adults as well as children. There is no critical period after which UG ceases to operate. Indirect access. Second language learners have access to UG through their first language. Only first language instantiated principles and first language instantiated parameter values of UG are available to the learner. Klassen and Moisken represents the so-called indirect access hypothesis, postulating the availability of UG knowledge via the first language grammar. White's two significant conclusions. Number 1, UG is inaccessible, but any aspect, principle, and parameter of it available in the first language can be used in second language. Number 2, initially, second language learners assume that first language value of UG parameters but are still able to tape UG. No access, the fundamental difference hypothesis. Second language learners no longer have access to the principles and parameters of UG. General learning principles replace UG. Second language learners have access to UG, but this is partly blocked by the use of the problem-solving system. And that's all for the 5.1 chapter, Access to UG Principles and Second Language Acquisition. Thank you so much for watching and for listening. Please stand by for our next reporter for the continuation of the topic.